Welcome to Political Fictions, a podcast that sneaked into the stadium to watch Iran qualify for the 2006 World Cup. My name's Cory and watching over me before the Vice Squad takes me away is Mark Pack. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Cory. Lovely to join you again.
It's World Cup season, Mark. England may probably have been knocked out actually by the time this episode comes out, but hope springs eternal. We're watching Offside this week, which is an Iranian film featuring women disguise themselves as boys to get into stadiums so that they can watch the Iranian national team. So give us a second to add some face paint and then we'll go in through the terraces. Okay, first item on the agenda. Had we seen this before? And a plot synopsis.
No, I hadn't seen it before, and it's a play about women trying to watch a football match. Next business, please. I had heard of the film before, and I was aware of the broader issue about women being hugely restricted, frequently banned from watching football in Iran. But the film itself was a new one on me. So
I had seen it before, so I remember the scenes in the stadium where they're sort of being corralled by the national servicemen. I remember the celebrations at the end. I don't think that's a spoiler. We're not going to spoil the result of a football match that finished 20 years ago. If you're still working your way through the Asian qualifying section of the 2006 World Cup on YouTube,
pause now. Pause now.
You've made a terrible mistake listening to this.
Working your way through that, thinking, well, I can just, want a bit of a break from the Group C qualifying matches. I know what I can safely listen to as a podcast about, political fiction. Yeah. I'm going to be safe there.
You should have ploughed on and just watched Bahrain, Japan. Are you a football fan?
No.
The chance that this podcast descends into blokey banter is therefore lessened, which is probably a relief to a good section of our listenership.
People are safely immune from a revival of 1990s lads football banter on this podcast.
I sort of suggested this partly because it's the middle of the World Cup. There aren't many political films that talk about football, but also because, again, we probably put this together, the opening sort of episodes together about February, March, didn't we? And back then, Iran was in the news because of the protests and because of the repression of the regime to those protests. And in that sense, it felt like an interesting film to watch in that context. The news has moved on a bit since then. I think it's the kind of film that you can watch with spoilers, to be honest. So I'm just going to give the plot because I think that will help the discussion. So the film follows a group of girls who try and sneak into the football stadium to watch Iran play Bahrain in the final qualifying match of the 2006 World Cup. So essentially, they all try and sneak in individually and then are sort of herded together collectively. And girls have to sneak in, women have to sneak in because women aren't allowed into football stadiums in Iran. They are guarded by Iranian men on national service while they're waiting to be processed by the vice squad. They're then taken by coach away from the stadium before the game finishes. But they keep in touch via radio with the news that's happening from the ground. Iran wins 1-0 and they qualify for the World Cup. This sparks celebrations on the streets of Tehran. That's how the film ends. On to All the President's Men, second item on the agenda, cast and crew. So directed by Jafar Panahi. This was his fifth film, but a very significant director, isn't he? I suppose in Iranian film,
and a more significant director beyond the niche of Iranian film as well. I think he's won multiple awards. I mean, just at a personal level, really impressive. His bravery in battling oppressive bureaucracy to find ways of making films. Sadly, he has gone on record to say the story about one of his films being smuggled out of Iran on a USB drive hidden inside a cake is untrue. There's a lot to admire about him, absolutely. And earlier in his career, he made documentaries, which I think we very much see in this film. The style is a very documentary type style. If you were to dip in and watch 10 minutes of this film, you might end up thinking you were watching a documentary or a sort of fly on the wall, observation. So really impressive backstory to the director. And also one should say the events that it's based on, although in one sense they're relatively sort of light, as in somebody trying to smuggle themselves in to see an event when they're not allowed in, actually underlying it is quite a serious and grim story.
And that's a bit of a thing that runs all the way through the film, isn't it? Is this quite upbeat, almost banterous relationship between the women and the national servicemen who are guarding them, with almost like the almost unreferenced the fact that it can't happen. It's not so much that there are tonal shifts, but there's something wider sort of happening, isn't there? And some of his other films you might have heard of. So it was just an accident. Was one of those that was, I think, massively tipped for an Oscar, wasn't it, last year? Taxi, Tehran, and This Is Not a Film are, I think, the other ones that you might have heard of. They're all similar in the sense that, as you say, they're kind of shot documentary style, partly because they kind of have to be done in secret. And like those, this film, Offside, is banned in Iran. Although I think Panahi's also said that Offside is probably the film of his which is most watched in Iran, even though it's banned, which again comes to some of the themes we're probably going to talk about. Essentially, he submitted a fake script. He submitted a fake script to the rather Orwellian Ministry of Guidance, essentially saying it was about men going to a football match. The Ministry of Guidance said, "We'll only give you permission if you re-edit your previous films." So he refused and filmed anyway. And it sounds like, I'm trying to remember from the DVD extras, I think essentially they only cottoned on that this was happening, but essentially towards the end of the filming. So they'd managed to film most of the stuff in the stadium. I think the only stuff that they hadn't filmed at the time the Ministry of Guidance realises that they haven't got permission to film is for the later scenes in the van at the end. So when they're being driven from the stadium, which he was able to film outside Tehran in somewhere more remote.
I mean, overall, the film was made very quickly by sort of Hollywood or British standards in terms of being filmed in 37 days. But part of it is filmed at the actual football stadium during the actual football match. And so that must have been a really pressured bit of filming, because even with, allowing for the sort of half-time break, you've got less than 2 hours, haven't you? And this isn't a game that goes to extra time or penalties, is it? This is, it's a normal group qualification match, so it's the standard 90 minutes plus a bit of injury time plus a break. That's not a lot of time to film what is quite an extensive set of scenes. I mean, I guess some of the scenes of people going up and down the stairwells and in the toilets and so on may well have been done not on match day, but the scenes that are just outside the sitting area of the stadium and you've got the match in the background zone, I presume those will have all been filmed in, close enough to real time, particularly as the script was tweaked as it was being filmed to reflect what was actually happening in the match.
I think so. I don't get the impression that, this is filmed at 8 different football matches that they've combined together. I think it was just this one. And particularly impressive when you think that basically the cast are non-professional actors, which I think is to your point about it looking a bit like a documentary. And that, there's a couple of actors. So there's an older girl who's the one in sort of mainly black and a baseball cap, who's been in a couple of other plays and films. One of the older characters who plays one of the dads in the film, I think, is also a professional actor. But the rest, if you look on IMDb, I think this is basically their only entry. They don't really have any.
And it works quite well in the sense that the characters they're playing are meant to be in situations that is making them slightly sort of awkward and uncomfortable. So the different young soldiers, them being actors with very little experience, pretty good nonetheless, one has to say. But there is a certain greenness about them that sort of reflects what they're meant to be as, young, inexperienced soldiers, not quite sure what they're doing. And that works really nicely. Very, very cleverly constructed film, given all of the restrictions on the director, who you can work with, when you can film, dodging the censors, very, very intricately assembled in a way that makes it quite a strong artistic creation.
And they're all quite different characters as well, aren't they? So, that's true about the soldiers, where although they're all in the same military uniform, this one's the country bumpkin, this one's the angry one, this one's the bossy one, this one's the kind of nice but slightly dim one. But it's true with the women and the girls in the film as well. So apparently, and I love this detail, and he found found the women in the film at university, I think through people who they like football basically, and he basically said, turn up as if you were going to disguise yourself as a boy and sneak into the stadium. So what you see in the film is how they would do it. But what that means is they've all gone for slightly different costumes. Yeah. So one has literally gone in a military uniform. Like one's gone in kind of all black, one's gone with quite colour. But it does again mean they all establish it without much screen time and without many lines. They don't have a load of exposition of, oh, hello, my name's Cory, I'm from Birmingham. I'm Mark from Islington. Like they
Yeah,
don't.
that's true because you very quickly get the sense of these are people who don't know each other, are from different backgrounds, yet have the common theme of being women trying to get into a football match. So they have a commonality, but lots of different. Yeah, and yeah, it that's again done very subtly but effectively.
Yes. Speaking of subtle but effective around Butler's Art of the Possible,
Mm.
are there any similarities between this film and real events? I mean, oh,
Yes.
Sarah, yes.
I mean, not only is the film literally made at the actual football match that it's depicting, but also it was in part inspired by the director's own experience in his family, where his daughter wanted to go to a football match and was refused access. And more broadly, it was made at the time when there was beginning to be a little bit of hope and optimism that more women would be allowed to see football matches. There had been a previous occasion where women were allowed into the stadium, I think after the match, not when there was a match on, but had been subsequently allowed into the stadium to celebrate Iran's previous World Cup qualification. So this is very much rooted in the real story of women wanting to get into football matches and often, but not always, being caught.
Yes, and there's lots of reference to real Iranian footballers and some being particularly short and some being particularly unskilled or skilled.
Unfortunately, my knowledge of the Iranian national squad at the time is not sufficient to be able to tell you how fair the appraisal of someone's heading ability is in the film. But I did notice that the Iranian football team got thanks in the credits, as did the spectators, which I wonder how the Iranian football team felt about that, given it's a film made by a dissident director. I can imagine some people might think, I'm not sure I want to be thanked by you. Now, others might obviously take pride in having helped such art being created, but I can imagine there might have been one or two players who might have thought, I'd rather not, be dragged into this. Thank you. But yeah, it's based on a real match. The social phenomena that it is documenting is real.
One of the girls refers to a friend who was killed at an Iran-Japan game. And so again, the DVD extras sort of talks about this and says apparently there were 110,000 in the stadium. I think on the match that we see in the film, about 85,000 there, and people were crushed exiting the game. And so 7 were killed, but only 6 were identified. And the extras sort of speculates that the unidentified victim might have been unidentified because they were female.
I guess the other thing that is very much based on real events, but has aged in quite a sad and tragic way, is the reference to the presence of foreign press in the country ahead of an Iranian presidential election, and therefore how oppressive measures by the police might be somewhat restrained whilst foreign press are present in the country because they wouldn't want to, give too bad an impression on them, which was exactly part of the calculus at the time. But obviously, the direction in which events have gone in Iran since weirdly makes that seem almost a mini golden age. I'm sure it didn't feel like a mini golden age at the time, but now you look back and you think, oh crikey,
the regime has to at least look like they're doing the right thing, however hypocritical that sort of is. Yeah, so there is that reference to the election. So this qualifying match, as our football knowledge has made clear, takes place in June 2005. So the election is essentially the election they're talking about is the one where Mahmoud Ahmadinejad wins for the first time. So he beats Rafsanjani in that race.
Any Iranian president is, I think, pretty much a shoe-in for our next category of the Phil Wallace Award.
Yeah, because there's a few. Well, he talks about the Vice Squad, doesn't it? Which I suppose maybe in English, maybe morality police is maybe how you talk it. There's a few of that. I mean, my nomination for the character who's in the film is again a national serviceman. Talk about the chief who's going to come in. Again, you think he's going to be one of these people who's a bit of a lurking presence, but then he does turn up and seems quite unpleasant in a bit of a regime goon kind of way.
Yeah, although unpleasant relative to the other soldiers, if you were to have told me in advance this character is going to be the really unpleasant member of the security apparatus of the Iranian government, I would have expected them to actually be several degrees more unpleasant. And I don't know whether that is partly there's only so far that dissident directors can go, and how far the director felt he was able to go in making the film, or whether that's partly a reflection as well of how even with very authoritarian governments, it's often quite ordinary human beings who are the sharp end of the security and the oppressive apparatus, and therefore perhaps the film is deliberately trying to slightly humanize them.
I was wondering, maybe to use a bit of a football analogy, I'm guessing that girls who are sneaking into football matches is very much League Two on the scale
Mm,
of regime dissidents. Whereas if they were doing something like going out on protests or
mm,
producing dissident literature or whatever it might be, you might see more evil people with more robust approaches, maybe.
mm, mm.
And equally, if they're not using professional actors, it might make sense. You don't have someone who's kind of conveying that level of menace, maybe.
And also, yes, I guess also if you're not using professional actors, the amount of on-screen violence you can safely show is rapidly reduces to almost nothing, because staging even somebody being hit, I guess,
Hmm.
is a bit problematic if you've not got professional actors who know how to actually cope with that.
I think so. Do you have a nomination for the Phil Willis Award in this film?
The mullahs of Iran.
Barack Obama's tam suit. There's very, very little political detail in this film, but in a way, that's okay because it means that Mark's going to showcase some footballing knowledge. So take it away.
Absolutely. So I was quite excited to notice right near the start of the film somebody wearing a football shirt with the name Canu on it. And I thought, oh, I vaguely remember that chap from when he was in the Arsenal Invincibles squad. So the season in which Arsenal lost no match at all. Canu was one of the squad members. He's also been at Ajax and Inter Milan, as well as appearing twice for Nigeria in the World Cup finals, all of which explains why it is believable and credible that somebody would have a Canu shirt, even though at the time the film came out, Canu was playing for West Brom, who are perhaps not quite got the same international fan club as the
Good,
Nigerian team or Ajax or Inter Milan or Arsenal.
slightly controversial, but a good obscure Birmingham reference. Although I realise that there's a few people in that country who will not like my category of that as an obscure Birmingham reference.
Yes. If there is anyone listening who is an expert in the Nigerian team squad numbering system, I would be grateful if they could explain why the number on Canu's Nigerian shirt in all the photos of him online that I could find is different from the number on the shirt in the film. And I'm not sure if that's due to some weird numbering thing or whether it's meant to be a fake shirt, that it's sort of somehow a subtle commentary on pirated goods.
So I reckon it's probably a pirated. I could be being very cynical here, Mark, but I'm not sure that that shirt was bought from an official vendor of.
Nigerian football
Yeah,
apparel.
that would be my
Yeah.
hunch.
But
Yeah.
it's the other one thing that struck me was the 1862 hat, which
How
at
did that?
first I didn't know what that referred to, and I wondered if there was that had say some Iranian or Middle Eastern reference. But as Notts County are basically the first football club and founded in 1862, I presume that is a football reference as well. I'd like to think it's an obscure British political reference because 1862 was a jolly exciting year. But I think it is a football reference too, isn't it?
Oh, it's shameful that I didn't think about the Notts County reference. What is the British political event from 1862 they could be highlighting?
Well, one of several events they could be highlighting, and that actually makes me think I'd quite fancy wearing some 1862 apparel, is that 1862 is, of course, the year in which Westminster Bridge was opened in London.
Oh, that's a bit of a callback to Brexit, the Uncivil War.
It's
Um,
also the year in which the Companies Act of 1862 was passed, hence it being called the Companies Act of 1862, which I think corporate lawyers, do correct me if I'm wrong, is seminal in the creation of limited liability companies. So one could say it's sort of the legal birth of modern capitalism, perhaps 1862. I know I'm bigging up the year a little bit there, but
that could be very subversive if that's what they're honouring, but I think Notts County seems more plausible. which is
I
not a
don't know.
sentence.
Maybe the person who's wearing the hat in the film is wanting to become a corporate, an international corporate lawyer.
It's true.
Maybe that's why you.
I do like I like the shirts in the film. I like the fact there's a Brazil Ronaldo 9
Yeah,
shirt. And
absolutely.
it's just that sense of the globalization of football
Yeah.
that this is something that people know all over the world.
It reminded me a lot of some genuine footage from Tahrir Square in Cairo during the Arab Spring, which showed at least one person wearing a Manchester United football top. I remember just my eye being really caught by that, seeing it on TV at the time. And also, I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Is it a lovely example of how football brings the world together? Or is it an awful example of sort of global commercialism? Uh, Maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe it's a bit of both.
I think when I think about my past life as a teacher and think about the kids who I would have taught
Mm,
who knew, who Ronaldo were, who Messi were, I wonder if part of it is because they see those people on adverts. They can
mm,
see them on free-to-air telly on the World
yeah.
Cup, but might not be able to afford to go and see Aston Villa or Birmingham City
Mm,
or whoever it is
yeah.
live. And so in a way, it's
Weirdly, the global superstar is the more accessible because they appear more on free to air.
yeah, and that
Mm,
yeah, because you if you don't have a Sky subscription,
mm,
if you don't have a season ticket, then you're more likely to know the global superstars.
yeah.
I would say perhaps a very British coup.
Mm.
Next item: are there conspiracy theories in this film? And not really. I mean, sneaking into the stadium, bit sneaky. It's
More
not really a.
sneaky than conspiracy.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
think there are two conspiracy theories that struck me. One very small, one absolutely global. So the small one is there is that point at which one of the guards, is telling the women what's happening on the pitch and claims that a particular player has headed the ball. And we then get into a dispute between the guard and the women about how tall that player is, whether he can head, whatever. I know nothing about the real Iranian footballer. I've just no idea whether, the guard is making it up or not, but it feels like there's a possible little conspiracy there, like the guard is trying to just get the women to shut up by telling them, making up something. And of course, the bigger conspiracy question comes back to the point about the football shirts and so on. Is the World Cup a beautiful way of bringing humanity together and opening up societies, or is it a dreadful way of enabling dictators to entrench their control over countries?
Surely not this one, Mark. Can't be
Surely
thinking.
not.
I quite like the fact that this
Mm,
brings people together towards the
mm,
end of the film. I imagine we'll probably talk about that.
mm.
But
Let's get to how to win an
yes,
election.
again, it's not a massively
Mm,
political film in that sense. But I suppose the main policy issue in that sense is the kind of egregious
mm,
banning of women from
mm.
public spaces. And whether banning things is effective. The fact that this film is watched in Iran, even though it's banned, tells you something. And the DVD extras also make the point if music's banned in Iran, it's often listened to more. But it's also, I mean, the interesting thing in the film is that hypocritical nature of bands, isn't it?
Mm.
And there's some really interesting chats that the girls have with one of the national servicemen.
Yeah, I feel I've got very mixed feelings about that banter because you get in the film it reminded me a lot of the West Wing scene about Bartlett and the Bible, because you get
Mm.
this banter back and forth between one of the women in particular and a guard, where the guard is trying to justify why women are banned from watching football, and the woman basically catches him out about how his arguments make no sense and they're completely illogical. And so it feels very West Wing like if only you can have 10 minutes of really clever dialogue, you can make the other person look completely foolish and you completely win the argument in an absolutely clincher of a way. But of course, in practice, that's not how the world works. And so my first reaction was this is just all a bit twee and artificial and naive. But then I remembered who was making this film, as in a dissident director at the sharp end in Iran. And I thought, well, okay, he probably knows a bit better than me. And so maybe that dialogue should be given a bit more credit than I gave it initially. But it's certainly very well written, and it is a
Mm.
fun back and forth. I guess the one slight critique I would make of the dialogue, though, is I don't think it. I mean, let's just be very clear. I am not in favour of the Iranian government. I do think women should be allowed in to watch football. I even think women should be allowed to play football as well. But I do think the counter argument, the one that the soldier tries to make, he doesn't make very well at all. And often, at least what I find more interesting about, say, a film such as this, is when you hear the other case put very well. You might still be completely unconvinced by it, but understanding what the internal logic is of someone who has a completely different worldview from yours can often be quite interesting. And I thought the soldier didn't quite do it. On the other hand, the soldier is meant to be quite a young, inexperienced, not very knowledgeable person. So it would have been a bit suspicious, I guess, if they had all of the right rhetoric to deploy.
Yeah, because I suppose the case that they talk about is, well, when Japan came over, then Japanese women were allowed into the stadium. And you're
Although
right.
that's actually the one bit where I did slightly favour the soldier side of the argument, very briefly, because I do think there is a legitimate, case to say we think this thing is wrong. The people from this other country think it's right. Therefore, when they're here, the polite thing to do as somebody hosting your guests is to let them do their thing, but safely kept away from. I can see a little, and in a sense, I wish there had been more of that because I thought, okay, I can see a smidgen of where the sort of sexist dictators are coming from, and it would be interesting to understand a little bit more of that.
Because I suppose the argument then the Guard makes is quite paternalist, isn't it? It's essentially that women would get corrupted going to football, lots of lots of bad language or that sort of thing. I mean, it gives us a bit of a chance to talk about national service. Obviously, there's a big issue in the 2020. Well, I say big issue, but the Rishi Sunak tried to make it an issue in the 2024 election. They're sort of bringing back national service. Have to say, I don't think the film is a great advert for bringing back national service, given that I'm guessing everyone has to do their sort of compulsory military service, but end up essentially doing quite dull admin stuff.
Yeah.
Which is kind of my impression of what happened when it was in place in the 40s and 50s anyway.
I mean, in terms of sort of advice on how to actually win an election rather than go down to a landslide defeat, I guess there's the bit at the end with food, dancing, and sparklers, and you just distract them with all of this fun stuff.
The bread and circuses approach.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very well-worn political approach for dictators the world over.
In a similar way, a classic example of trying to stop people from doing something often blows up in your face. There's a scene in which one of the girls has to go to the toilet, but obviously there's no girls' toilets in a stadium. Not that in an actual football stadium, the men and women toilets are usually sort of mismatched in terms of size of numbers anyway. But the guard tries to take her to the toilet and says she's covering her face with a poster with a football and puts eye holes through. And it's just that. And then when people are trying to come into the toilet when she's there and the guard's making a whole fuss and dance. And it's a classic example of how drawing people's attention to something, it just makes it worse. And if he'd have just gone through quietly, it might have been okay.
Yeah.
Slight spoiler. There's a scene in which one of the girls escape, and there's a classic discussion which you could easily have seen on something like The Thick of It about the apportion of blame, in which you've kind of got the lead guard saying, I'm not being held responsible for his blunder.
Yeah.
I'm looking to throw his subordinate under the bus. And then the subordinate says he'll throw himself under the bus if required. And again, it just made me think, yeah, there's lots of contexts in which we've seen this play out. Obviously not in Downing Street over the past 6 months.
Not at all.
Not at all. One of the other interesting arguments, actually, that's made in the chat is about why don't you just watch it on telly? And it's that interesting, wanting to be in the room where it happens, wanting to be sort of part of the action.
Yeah, and that to me had slight echoes of some of the American civil rights arguments about trying to argue that, well, okay, you can do this thing, but as long as you're kept separate and off on your own, and surely how could you possibly object to being kept separate and off on your own? That sort of separate but equal was the slogan of many sort of segregationists. And so I think there are definitely echoes of wider civil rights issues that play out in other countries and at other times as well.
Yeah, one example of that maybe is again at the end when they're being taken to the van and one of the girls starts crying and someone who I think is the older kind of becomes not quite the mother hen, but definitely kind of looking out for them,
Yeah.
sort of says to her, just imagine we're going to a hotel. And
Mm.
again, that sort of thing made me think about civil disobedience here. Like you can imagine someone
Mm.
like, say, Extinction Rebellion,
Mm.
where again part of the act is that you're doing it knowing you're going to get arrested. And there's probably
Mm.
quite a few people who do get arrested quite constantly for acts of civil disobedience.
Mm.
And I imagine that's a sort of similar phlegmatic
Yeah.
attitude you sort of have to have. Next item, zeitgeist tape, production details to savor. I mean, we've talked about a lot of it. The fact
Mm.
that I mean, just the whole filming of the film in a way is one of the most awe-inspiring things about the film.
Yeah, and when I watched it, I didn't at the time know that it was filmed at the actual football match. And so when you get some of the scenes where you can sort of see a little bit of what's happening on the pitch behind some of the characters, at first I was thinking, oh wow, is this really well done back projection, or is this actually done at a football match? And if it's done at a football match, how on earth have they managed to do it? It's really impressive.
Were you thinking it was like All the President's Men,
Mm.
where they had shorter people in the office? You thought they found
Yeah.
tiny
Many people in the
footballers.
background, yes. The other thing which I suspect, due to my lack of language skills, I didn't fully appreciate is the graffiti on the wall in the toilets. Because I did notice there was a really sort of well done artistic bit of graffiti showing somebody with a patch over one eye. And I don't know if there was a political point to it, a bit, maybe there was a sort of slightly Nelsonian thing about either not ignoring the government or the government's not able to see anything. And there's a lot of writing on the walls. And I just thought, given how artistic that patch over one eye is, this feels like this is not just, this is graffiti they've taken some care over either finding or putting on the walls. Although if it was filmed at the real stadium, maybe it's just sort of genuine graffiti, but there wasn't really any artistic choice or discretion over showing it if you're filming in the toilets. But yeah, I suspect there's something interesting if you can read the graffiti to sort of get a sense of the time and the place.
So this might not be true, but I'm going to say it anyway, which of course is one of the themes of this podcast.
We're not recording our podcast episode about Brexit this time, Cory.
Well, so there's a 2015 BBC article about a satirist mocking Iran's ayatollahs. So he's asked about his avatar, which is of a mullah with one eye. And he says apparently it's a real ayatollah from the revolution in 1906. He put one eye instead of two because he only sees things his own way.
So yeah, so I think that probably is a political message, which in itself is interesting. In the scene involving the toilets, which this time doesn't involve an interesting toilet door. Call back to an earlier episode there. The idea is that the guard is keeping the men away, whilst the woman who he's having to pretend is a man, because otherwise he'd have to admit that they'd let a woman into the football match by mistake, is using the facilities. So what you've got therefore in that scene, if we're right about the graffiti, is the one solitary member of the law enforcement stood with walls on both sides festooned with anti-government, anti-mullah graffiti. And that's quite a powerful image that I think probably Iranian viewers would appreciate and feel is a much more important part of the film than I guess you or I did because of our lack of language skills.
Yes, I imagine so. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's terrible. I hadn't even noticed the guy with the eye patch. What I did notice though is an old Nokia phone, which again call back to this house and the rotary dial phones, but the old Nokia 3310. It's good to see it back.
Yay!
Again, so it's filmed on digital because it's easier to hide, and I'm pretty sure there's a scene at the start when they're outside the stadium in which one of the young boys notices that he's got a camera because you see him sort of go like it literally breaks the fourth wall. It's like, oh yeah, but you can see him like he's walking but still staring at the camera, and it's just a really
and yeah. Again, because I hadn't read up on the film before watching it, that stuff filmed outside the stadium. I'm presumably nearly everyone that you see is a genuine member of the public going to watch the football, or a genuine member of the military, the police, the authorities in some form, watching every. That's all sort of. I mean, I guess given he got permission through the fake script, etc., maybe they knew he was filming, so maybe it was not quite as. But yeah, it feels like it's one of. There's definitely stuff that once you know about how the film was made, that you think, oh, I want to go back and watch that again, or I want to think about that again, or hopefully for people who've listened to the podcast, knowing what you've heard us discuss will give you an extra degree of enjoyment if you haven't yet watched the film.
Yeah, it's just extra. I don't know if it's also maybe, well, he's got a camera, but he must surely have got permission to use it, otherwise he wouldn't be doing it. Is it almost like
it's a bit like the equivalent in Britain of if you wear a fluorescent top, then people are bound to assume
just carry around the clipboard.
Yeah. Yellow top, clipboard, hard hat. They're bound to have permission.
A couple of scenes I like. The soldier commentating on the game to the girls, I just think is quite fun. But the final scene on the coach back from the stadium is really good. There's it made me think of Dad's Army, actually, because there's a point where the soldier buys them all drinks from a cafe, and you can, the telly's on and you can see the game happening. But the fact that he buys some drinks made me think of the Deadly Attachment when Walker set out to get the fish and chip orders for the German U-boat crew. They're trying to listen to it on the radio, and obviously it's tense because Iran needs to qualify, and there's this weird slapstick with the soldier having to hold the aerial because the radio commentary is going in and out, so he ends up sort of halfway out the window, doesn't he?
It's an episode of Hancock's Half Hour, isn't there, with the TV aerial being manipulated.
Yeah. So you talked earlier about the kind of West Wing dialogue. I'm wondering, I wonder how much of it is improvised, how much it is fed to them, and how much of it is genuine. And when they're all sort of sat, the camera's on everyone's face, all the girls' faces, all the women's faces, and the final dying moments of the game. And I'm pretty sure that the tension on their faces as they wait for the final whistle is not just acting. And I think the celebrations afterwards, once they've qualified, isn't just acting.
Yeah, because of course, if it was being filmed at the match, those scenes that were being filmed at the match, the actors taking part will, even if they weren't particularly keen football fans, will presumably have felt a real sense of tension about what is going to happen. Is Iran going to qualify?
Yeah, I think so. Final item, state of play. Would you recommend? Yeah, that's not a good. That's not good noises.
The film ends on quite an optimistic note, with everyone coming together to celebrate something, and in a way, people remembering their shared humanity. And I think, given what has happened in Iran since, that it's quite the happiness of the ending makes it actually for quite a downbeat experience, I think. But also, I think of all the things we've reviewed so far on this podcast, it's the one that I would be least likely to rewatch. I was sort of in a football qualifying sort of style, thinking of head-to-head contests between this and all of the other things. And in each case, I would pick the other thing that we've reviewed for this podcast. But I do feel a bit guilty about sort of down rating the film, because it's about such an important topic, the bravery of a dissident filmmaker. There is lots of really good things about it, but in the end, I give it a 325. It is the lowest score I've given to anything so far, and I feel bad about it, but I'm not rushing to rewatch it. I'm not even thinking I might rewatch it in a couple of years, to be honest. So
I think
Theresa May
Theresa May 2017. I felt that is. I know what you mean. I think again, it's one of those that we picked to talk about, having not done these episodes, and having, I guess, the contrast between this, which is a film that I picked that you hadn't seen, and say King's Game, which you'd picked that I hadn't seen. What we're talking about in the podcast.
My taste is better than yours. What can I say? But no, I should completely recant that, because I am very glad I've watched it. But sometimes, when you're glad you've watched something, you can also think, I'm probably not going to watch it again. And that film hits this category for me.
I'm sort of conscious that this podcast could end up being, we could literally do 4,000 episodes of Men in Grey Suits talking about politics, and we'd have a lot of fun. And there was part of it, could we try and do something a bit different? And I'm glad we had, but I think you're right. It's maybe the kind of film that, I think it is an entertaining film, but it's more arty than maybe some of the other, we're not going to get a lot of mileage talking about films like this every week, but I'm glad we've kind of
Yeah.
touched on it.
Yeah.
And a bit like you, I was thinking a lot about the women in this film and the boys. I mean, they're not. Yeah, they're probably about my age, really. 20 years on.
Mm.
I just wonder. I did find myself thinking. I wonder, how they are, especially at the moment. Again, having sort of suggested this film in the context of the regime repression and what's happened in Iran since then. It's quite a sobering watch. I really like the scene at the end where it feels. I like the fact that football and sport has this opportunity to bring people together and to celebrate collectively, even for all of the cynicism and the bread and circuses and the terribleness of the countries that might be hosting or what have you. I think it's nice that football and sport can do that.
So I gave it a 325 Theresa May type score. What did you go for?
I've given it 420.
Ooh, that is, checking carefully our spreadsheet, the second biggest gap in our scores.
So what's the biggest gap then?
It really surprised me when I saw what the biggest gap was, because I did wonder if there was a data entry error in our spreadsheet, but no, it's correct. The biggest gap was for the Borgen episode on Greenland.
Is that more than 100?
Yeah.
Oh yes, because I gave it. Yeah, you gave it.
Because you gave it an absolutely outrageously wrong score, and I gave an absolutely correct score, and therefore it was So anyway, all of which goes to show this is definitely a film I would recommend people watch if they've not seen it. Even though I'm in the watch it once, never again. Well, not never again. I won't flee the room if it's on. I think it is worth, just as you say, ending on that note of huge admiration for the bravery of the filmmaker and everyone else involved in the film. Anything that either of us have encountered in politics, in the UK, is just pales by comparison with what it must be like being a dissident filmmaker in Iran.
And there's a BBC series at the moment. Well, you can get it on iPlayer about people who have resisted the regime in Iran, and it's definitely worth a watch. And yeah, it's very powerful. We've got a newsletter, haven't we? And you can keep in touch about what we're doing in the future.
Absolutely.
On that.
So politicalfictions.substack.com is where you can go to sign up to our email newsletter about this podcast. You'll get notifications each time there is a new episode out, and occasional little bits of extra bonus content. And of course, you can also subscribe to this podcast in your favourite podcast app.
And what are we talking about next time?
So next time, we're talking about a film I picked, which is a black and white movie. If I remember correctly, it is one of the American political classics, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I remember watching it at the National Film Theatre many years ago with a friend who's also involved in politics. One of us claimed we could see lots of parallels with modern British politics. The other disclaimed having spotted any parallels whatsoever. So quite looking forward to rewatching that and seeing whether my views or my friend's views have aged the better.
Perfect. And I think I can confirm it is black and white. Don't watch a colorized version. Jimmy Stewart will look very garish.
And excitingly, there will be a novelty in that episode, won't there?
First ever guest appearance.
Ooh.
Speak to you soon.